Well, good evening. I'm Alan Jackson, and welcome to Nashville. And welcome to our guest, Coach Joe Kennedy. Just another regular guy who coached a high school football team. Except that this was the coach who had a habit of saying a prayer after every game, a very brief private moment at the 50-yard line, until the authorities in his district told him to stop. Well, it turns out they were messing with the wrong guy. Joe Kennedy was a Marine and a man with a deep faith. He may have listened to advice about calling a play, but he was never going to listen to anyone messing with his faith. Welcome to Nashville, Coach.
Thank you.
What a journey you've had. And now the full story is out in your new book, Average Joe. Everybody needs to read this. It's one man's faith and the fight to change a nation. It's certainly one of the more inspirational stories that I've read in years. I want people to get to know your story in the time we've got. Before you were a high school coach, and before you made it to the Supreme Court, you actually got expelled from school more than once. Can we start back at the beginning and tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, from unwanted child, I was put up for adoption, and I became an angry kid. And yeah, the first time I was kicked out, I was expelled in 3rd grade, so about age 9. So I was a pretty bad kid, and things didn't get better until I joined the military. So in and out of group homes, foster homes, boys' homes, I was a mess, a complete disaster.
Well, I'm a pastor, so I hear a lot of people's stories. You were actually adopted, and then your adoptive family's circumstances changed, and they put you back in the system.
Yes, sir.
Which fueled the rejection and the anger even more.
Yep, confused, angry kid, that's what I was all this time.
Well, let's go back to that moment when you decided to kneel at the 50-yard line and pray on the field. What was going through your mind when you decided to do that?
Well, the very last time you're talking about was, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just believing in the Lord that He has called me to do this, and I believed I was doing the right thing. I knew that the last time I prayed on the 50-yard line, it was going to cost me everything in my job. The first time, didn't even bat an eye, because praying in public, praying in anywhere, this is America. You could pray wherever you want. God doesn't care. But obviously somebody did, and it ultimately cost me everything. And I just did it because it was the right thing to do, and that was my thing with God, is that my covenant was to give Him thanks after every game, win or lose.
Well, it seems like to me, with 20 years in the Marine Corps, you had invested your life in fighting for the privilege of having a prayer.
Yeah, the Constitution really meant something to me. It wasn't just something that I read at one time, and when I take the oath of enlistment, it still makes the hair in the back of my head stand up to support and defend the Constitution. So the First Amendment was very clear, so simply wrote and so eloquently wrote that anybody can understand it. The freedom of our religion and the freedom of expression, these are things that people can't take away from us, and that's what they were trying to do.
So tell us how you got word that the local authorities wanted you to stop. What did they say, and what did you tell them?
They sat down with the whole group, the superintendent and the rest of the school board, and we sat there, and they said, just stop praying with the kids and I think everything will be fine. And I said, well, that's unfortunate, because this is what was so great about it and why they learned about it in the first place. They got a compliment from it. So this all started from a compliment. And so I stopped praying with the kids. I said, I don't want to have a fight. I just want to coach football. And that's what I did. I ended up just telling them that I'll stop praying with the kids. I never prayed with another one of my players again, but that wasn't good enough. They could still see me in public doing it. And that's where we came to the impasse, and they said, you need to choose between your faith and your job. And that was an easy one for me.
So you were praying at the field, but you weren't bringing the students in. You were just having a prayer.
Yes, at the end, that's exactly what I was doing.
And they objected to that?
They objected to that because I could be seen in public at a public school. Can you believe that?
I probably can, which is unfortunate. Did you ever consider doing anything other than praying?
I did. This was a huge battle for me, because nowhere in our church, in the groups, Bible studies I've ever been to, did they prep me for this. What do you do when you're confronted with this? Do you do what your boss is telling you, or do you do what your God's telling you? And I didn't know which way to go. The fighter in me, the American and the Marine in me was like, no, this is wrong. It's dead wrong. The Christian in me was very I didn't know what to do. So I spent a lot of time praying and asking and saying, God, am I supposed to go along with this or stand up and fight for what I believe in?
What did the people say? What did the fans say when they found out about the debate around you praying?
They were really great. Of course, you're going to have the 1 or 2%, but you should have seen it. We had, it was incredible. We had the entire stadium filled, and they came running out onto the field, and they all joined me. Can you imagine 5,000 people praying on a football field up in this little town in Washington State? It was the most awesomest thing I've ever seen. It just, God is moving in some incredible ways.
And this was more than praying in public. This got personal because your wife worked for the school board in charge of HR?
She was the HR director, yeah. So this was very close to home. This was, and we had 2 kids in the school. We had 2 kids in the high school and 1 in the middle school. So this was very much involved in every aspect of her life.
So your wife had to fire you?
Yeah, and I had to sue her in return. Great thing is that her name did not have to go on to the letter, but she was the one who did deliver it to me that said that my time of coaching was over. So we had some intense fellowship over this entire thing.
Well, I think that's an important piece of this story. This wasn't just something that was lived out in a courtroom. This came inside the house. I mean, you had to live with the pressure in the community. It affected the people you all worked with, in your family.
And it was on the news every single day. We couldn't go to the store. You couldn't go out in public. This is a small town and a military town. We grew up with these people. Our kids all grew up together. We all go to church together. The superintendent goes to the same church. So you can imagine this small community being disrupted like this. It's playing on every single thing from Fox News to CNN to ESPN. It was everywhere, and it infiltrated every aspect of our life, and it turned our life upside down. My wife wasn't happy about it, and she just wanted, like me, I just wanted to coach football and wanted to live my life. I didn't want any of this nonsense that was going on.
Well, Coach Kennedy, we're going to take a quick time out, so please stay with us for another segment if you will.
Absolutely.
And if you want to write an email and jump in on this discussion, you can send it to comments@alanjacksonnow.com. We'll be right back. Well, we're back now with Coach Joe Kennedy. The average Joe, as he's referred to in his new book. Of course, he's anything but your average Joe. You were a former Marine. No one should try to mess with the Marine. Tell me how the training that you got in the Corps prepared you for the 7-year journey with the school officials and the courts.
Well, you know, I was a really bad kid, so I needed to put all that anger into something, and the Marine Corps was a perfect place. I learned a lot about discipline and self-control and being able to utilize these skills that were bottled up inside of me for something good. And the great thing was that the Constitution actually came to life, and I was standing for something that meant more than myself. So really, it took me right into the perfect, I didn't even realize that God's fingerprints were on this, because you can remember, I was an atheist all throughout my time in the Marine Corps. There was no God to me. So when God got a hold of me, he did pick the right guy who loved to fight, and I'm a scrapper, so God knew what he was doing when he was designing this whole thing.
Well, I was smiling as I'm reading your story because I think the school board probably thought they had somebody that was kind of a quiet, reluctant Christian having a little prayer. And they tapped the shoulder of a 20-year Marine vet that had already overcome a troubled childhood. So God put you in that place for that moment.
Yeah, I heard that a lot of, well, I thought you were a Christian. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I'm not that kind of Christian.
Well, you shared a story in the book that I want you to share with the viewers. It's the one time you did have some apprehension as a Marine. It was during your first deployment that began with a seriously overweight jet, and you ended up coaching a flight attendant who was afraid you might not even get off the ground.
Yeah, that was a terrifying moment. We were just packed up. Iraq just took over in Kuwait, and we were 8th into the country, and we had no military jets, so we were on this jumbo 747 or whatever it was, and we are fully loaded. We have grenades, we have rounds in our rifles. We were expecting to get off and engage the enemy, and we were so heavy we started taking off, and the stewardess started strapping in, and she's got this look and she's white knuckling it, and I'm like, what's going on? She says, we've never been this heavy. When we started taking off, they went full throttle, and we didn't even start moving. Usually you get pushed back in your seat. We just sat there, and the guy comes on and says, we're going to give this a try. We'll see if it goes. And man, we barely cleared. And when we came down into Germany, we broke the landing gear. So we were heavy, and it was a terrifying. I don't like flying to begin with. And here I am thinking, man, I'm not even going to get to the combat. I'm going to die on this stupid plane.
Well, this whole event, I mean, from the beginning to the end, takes more than 7 years.
Yes, sir.
So this wasn't like a microwave prayer answer where you just prayed a simple prayer and you got the answer you wanted. How do you walk through 7 years of turmoil in your family, in your community? That's not a simple thing.
Yeah, I don't know how we did it. I look back all the time, and it took 9 football seasons for me to get back onto the field. And 7 times we lost in courts. That was the longest time in my life that I just kept questioning, God, is this the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? My family, we were at such odds with each other. And when you hear that, no, you're wrong, and that you can't have prayer in the public square. If you hear this enough, and the separation of church and state and all this nonsense that's been going on for the past 50 years, you kind of, it does seep in, and you do think that maybe I am not doing the right thing. But I just knew that God called me for a reason. And even if I was hanging up by my fingernails, I was going to stay true. And sometimes that's all I had was at night, just on my knees praying, going, God, just get me through one more day of this.
You know, it strikes me as a bit odd. I go to high school football games in college and watch some professional stuff. It's not unusual to hear profanity at a football game. And you're a Marine, you've probably heard one of those words. I'm sure you've never used it.
Never, no.
But you end up in front of the United States Supreme Court for a 15-second prayer, not profanity. How have we gotten to this place in our nation?
I still wonder that. I take a look around our country, and I guess the 20 years while I was in the Marine Corps, I lived in a different society where I didn't see it all coming unglued. I always assumed everybody was red-blooded American and were fighters and wanted to stand up for, Uncle Sam, apple pie, and baseball and all of those things. And I was under the illusion that this is the way all Americans were. So 20 years while I was serving to protect our Constitution, I didn't realize how it was being eroded away. So when I got out, it was this huge culture shock to me, thinking, this is not the America that I've been supporting and defending. And it's because of the apathy, and we just let this little stuff creep in, and it slowly erodes our society. It didn't happen overnight. This has happened over the past 50 years. And now we're trying to catch up and trying to come back around to where we're supposed to be.
We talked a little bit before the program, and you said you were better at living your Bible than you were quoting it. And I love that image because I'm responsible for a little bit of both. And we all know the verse about turning the other cheek. But when you're confronted with evil, it seems to me we also have a biblical assignment to stand up. And somehow you grasped that. And you were willing to stand, even in the midst of the stress it brought. So there's people watching this that are trying to decide whether they should capitulate to a school board that wants to put smut in a library, or if we should stand. What's your counsel to those people that are watching?
It goes back to the very basics of things that we're taught as human beings. God's put an imprint on our life, and even if you're not an American, which there's right and wrong in the world, and we all could put our finger on that. It's just we have let things come and just infiltrate our life. And my big motto is my Bible verse, 2 Timothy 4:7, of fighting the good fight, finish the race, and remaining faithful. Nowhere in there does it say we have to win, but we are called to be fighters and warriors. We're not called to be this lovey Christianity softness that the church has been portraying all this time. That's not the way the world is. God gave us dominion over this world, and we made a mess of it. So we need to be the ones to clean it up, and it starts with each one of us in our own homes.
I've got one more quick question before we go. The point of coaching is the kids.
Yes, sir.
So what was the impact of all of this on your players and those folks you were actually coaching?
I got to be the living example of what I've always preached to them. I wanted to be leadership by example, and this was the best way to show it, that even they didn't understand why I was doing what I was doing, but there's right and there's wrong. And if you don't stand up for what is right, even if it costs you everything, you're going to end up losing everything. But you got to fight for what you believe in and stand up for what is right. And my guys, they get to see that every single day now.
Well, Coach Kennedy, thank you for your time today. The book can be purchased everywhere, though we like suggesting you try to support your local bookstore. It's called Average Joe, and it's a winner. When we come back, I have some thoughts of my own to share after this inspiring visit with Joe Kennedy. And later in the show, your emails. I'll be right back. In his farewell address to the nation, President Ronald Reagan called America the shining city on a hill. Well, unfortunately, our nation has been on the wrong trajectory for a long time now. Growing up, I never imagined that in this great nation of ours, there would be a day when a person would be forbidden to quietly pray, that churches would be told to close their doors because they were deemed non-essential and they'd cooperate, or that a college biology professor would be fired for teaching basic biology, that it takes the union of a male and a female to create life. We live in an age of political correctness run amok. One of the tenets of political correctness is that you aren't supposed to state an opinion that would make someone else feel uncomfortable about their opinion. We're frequently told that faith is a personal, private matter. We shouldn't let our convictions about it press on anyone else's choices. Well, I'm sure that the Apostle Paul would have found that notion laughable. Listen to what he said. It's in Acts 20. I consider my life worth nothing to me. My only aim is to finish the race and complete the task the Lord Jesus has given me, the task of testifying to the good news of God's grace. Paul had been called away from persecuting believers and toward telling everyone he met what Jesus had done and how he had changed his life. And it seems that literally everyone he met got to hear the story. Paul went from being the persecutor of faith to being persecuted for his faith. Yet his goal never changed, to testify to the good news of God's grace. Folks, that's our assignment. God's blessed us and we get to tell others about it. And if they don't like it, we'll smile, we'll be kind, but we're going to keep telling the story. We've been called to be salt and light. If we'll do that, there's more reasons for hope than despair, I promise. Well, we'll be right back with some of your emails. Thank you for taking the time to send your emails. Your thoughts and perspectives, they're important to us. Nancy S. commented on the Steve Moore YouTube episode, I get angry about what is happening in our nation's government. I'm trying to lose that anger by praying for the people who are making me angry. Can anger be both good and bad, or is there no place in our lives as a Christian for anger? That's a really important question. The Bible tells us that God gets angry. There were things that angered Jesus. So it isn't that anger is a forbidden emotion. I think there are some things that we see or experience that should elicit a righteous indignation. That's the fancy word for getting angry. It's what you do when you're angry that matters. We can't allow anger to deteriorate into resentment and bitterness and hatred. We've got to offload it. Ultimately, we have to forgive, but there are some things that we see that elicit a response of anger because we're called to engage, to make a difference. In Coach's case, he had to stand up against an illegitimate demand that he not pray in public. And I think we have been surrendering for too long. It's time for us to respond with a bit of anger, not belligerence, certainly not violence, but we can't accept the dictates of evil to surrender our faith, or we're giving up the generations who follow us. And finally, Bob from Tennessee wrote, I think the reason that the pigs are squealing so loudly is they're afraid that if Doge digs deep enough, some of the fraud will be traced back to them. Well, Bob, I live in Tennessee and I understand the comment. And you're right, the pigs are squealing. I hope Elon and his team keep digging. Truth will set us free. That's biblical. If you haven't yet, take a moment to send your emails to comments@alanjacksonnow.com. Your feedback and questions, they do a lot to shape our show. I'm Alan Jackson. You have a wonderful evening.